Well, I guess this is going. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to BariAftercare, the podcast, video, however you're listening to this. I welcome you. I'm Dr. Connie Stapleton, and I have an impromptu topic today. The topic today is what do I even want to title it? Food issues and self esteem. What's the correlation? We'll go with that. And how I came up with this impromptu topic is listening to a radio show. I live in the Atlanta area, and there is a radio show that broadcasts here every day. And like my friends on The Young and the Restless, I have developed a fictional relationship with the characters. They don't know me, but I know them, kind of like everybody else listening to the show. So I've been listening to this radio show for like 5 years, and it's silly and it's nonsensical ish, but they often talk about very relevant topics. And I really do like the characters because they're very expressive. They talk a lot about their lives. They talk about their personal growth and development. The guy who started it has been doing the show for 20 years. And so it's just kind of fun to hear about their lives. And they do all kinds of silly, ridiculous, unimportant kinds of stunts on the show, but I just really like it, mostly because I really like the characters. So they'll all bring personal issues to the show, and they'll have calls from listeners, and they'll take emails, and it's a lot about relationship issues and alcohol and drugs and struggles in all areas of life. Anyway, the main guy on the show the other day said that he got an email, text from a friend of his who said, they were just kind of catching up with one another. And the guy's name is Bert. And Bert asked his friend, have you been dating anybody? He said, well, I went out with this one woman. I really liked her, but she smokes cigarettes. That's a deal breaker for me. And Bert apparently said something like, yeah, that would be a deal breaker for me too. I just don't like that. And he said, the guy said, to me, somebody who smokes has low self esteem. So Bert brought that question to the show. Does somebody who smokes have low self esteem? The guy's logic or rationale for what he said was, if somebody's going to put a toxic substance into their body on a consistent basis, knowing that it's going to cause harm to their body, and it could lead to really serious illnesses, it could lead to death, then his thought was they have low self esteem because somebody with higher self esteem would not treat their body that way. Well, the three other main characters on the show kind of got their undies in a wad about that. And they said, well, then anybody who eats sugar must have low self esteem, or anybody who has a drink must have low self esteem, and anybody who eats fast food must have low self esteem. And they were all up in arms about that, saying this was a terrible judgment call. You can't judge somebody like that, blah, blah, blah. Well, I was sitting in the background going, I think the guy has a point. I think the guy has a point. In all of the therapy that I do, also, I bring self esteem into the conversation where consistent inappropriate treatment of your body can it be an expression of low self esteem? So today, this has just been weighing on me for a couple of days. And so I wrote an email and I sent it to all the members of this radio show's cast, not to be like, hey, 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 but because I thought, let's look at another side of the conversation. So I'm going to share with you what I wrote as this podcast. And I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. So let me just kind of start. I said, hey, all, P1 fan here. I didn't even know what P1 meant, but people say it all the time because those are the fans of the fans, right? Those are the number one fans. So I looked it up to see what the Urban Dictionary had to say about that. I'm a P1 fan. I listen every dang day. So I said, P1 fan here, been listening nearly 5 years since moving to the Atlanta area on a daily basis. As an addiction specialist, I've been dwelling on something you guys were talking about on the show a week or so ago. Bert's friend said, lost my place. Bert's friend said that smokers have low self esteem issues. You guys pretty much all disagreed. Bert's friend made an excellent point, however. Of course, nothing is across the board or fits for everyone. Because I feel so strongly about this, I wanted to take a few minutes to provide some food for thought along with information from some experts. If you don't read the entire email, because it is kind of long, please read the first several paragraphs and skip the citations. So, anyway, I wanted to talk about this. And before I go into any depth here, I want to share with you that I don't believe that everybody, first of all, who struggles with food has a food addiction. I do not believe that everybody who has a food addiction struggles with weight issues. I'm a case in point. I've struggled with food addiction in the past, and it's always there. It's just not a primary addiction for me, but it was at one time. And I was very underweight. But we went through the criteria. When I say we, I mean Dr. Vera Tarman, who wrote Food Junkies, which is a really great book about food addiction. And I would encourage everybody to really read that. If you do, read the second edition, because she does talk about weight loss surgery in the second edition. So again, I take this topic and bring it down to addiction. This podcast, all of my work is not necessarily about addiction, but I do have specialty areas in addiction. And some people who have weight loss surgery do have a food addiction. And regardless of whether or not you have a food addiction, if you consider yourself to be an emotional eater, this information may also apply to you. Therefore, I think what I'm about to share here applies to the vast majority of people who have weight loss surgery. Some people do not have an addiction, other people are emotional eaters. Some may not consider themselves to be either of those, and that's fine. Regardless, listen to the information and do what they teach us in the 12-step programs. Take what fits, leave the rest. So on I go in my email. Most addiction experts, including myself, agree that at the core of all addictions, smoking, food addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction, gambling, shopping, etc., is shame. So at the core of all addictions is shame. According to Brené Brown, shame is an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something's wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of belonging. I am somehow flawed. That sounds to me like a self-esteem issue, right? Shame affects our overall self-esteem, and all addicts feel shame and have struggles in some areas of their self-esteem. Don't get too mad at me yet. Listen to what I have to say. From the National Institutes of Health, quote, when individuals experience shame, that feeling of not being worthy, the devaluation of self is present. We devalue ourselves, and it may lower self-esteem. So there's a correlation. They're not saying everybody who experiences shame has low self-esteem, but it may lower self-esteem. So what is self-esteem? What is self-worth? What is self-image? It's the way we look at ourselves, think about ourselves, feel about ourselves, and express ourselves. And low self-esteem doesn't mean we feel lousy about ourselves in every area of life. So I go on to say self-esteem is not an across-the-board issue. I tell my patients. A person may have great self-esteem in relation to their job. So a lot of people are like, listen, I feel very good about my abilities, my performance on my job. My self-esteem in this area is really, really good. They may have low self-esteem in relation to their body image. So regardless, you may have Healthy shame or healthy self-esteem as a parent or your job or a caretaker of your children or your parents or a pet parent. You may have great self-esteem in some areas of your life, and you may have lower self-esteem in other areas of your life. It's not an all or nothing thing. But having worked in bariatrics for almost 20 years, I can tell you that nearly everyone I have worked with has shared with me that their body image, their self talk, the way they think about themselves in relation to their weight and their body, they have low self esteem in that area. Same with any other addiction that I've worked with. So, regardless, shame, something everybody feels. Brene Brown talks about how everybody feels shame. So it's not just relegated to people who struggle with addiction issues or other areas of self esteem, but everybody suffers from shame about something. They feel embarrassed or unworthy or unlovable in some regard. So, regardless, shame can negatively affect one's self esteem. Maybe not your overall self esteem. Again, maybe just certain areas of your self esteem. Addicts tend to have lower self esteem issues and do feel shame in relation to their addictions. I've never met an addict who, once they get into recovery anyway, aren't willing to admit that they felt shame in relation to some of their behaviors, in relation to some of the secrecy related to their addictions, in relation to um, how they affected other people in their lives. So, most addicts do feel shame in relation to their addiction. Now, let me talk about addiction for just a minute. Addiction is like an umbrella. Addiction, so the umbrella is addiction, and each one of the spokes of the umbrella, one may be cigarettes, one may be food, one may be gambling, one may be pornography, one may be reading can be an addiction, one may be shopping, one may be who knows what. But any behavior that kind of runs your life and affects areas of your life, your work, your friendships, your relationships at home, how you feel about yourself, those kinds of behaviors will be classified as addictions. So they are outwardly look different, but that stem of the umbrella is shame. All addictions are centered around shame. So, what I know from all of my years of study and all of my work with patients is that all addicts feel shame. Nicotine is an addiction. So, this guy who is dating this woman who smokes is ingesting a drug into her body. When we eat sugar, processed food, unhealthy foods to the point that it's affecting our health, when we spend time on our phones or watching pornography or watching television to the point or play games, right? To the point that we are neglecting our family members, our jobs, our schoolwork, whatever it is, we've got a problem. And that problem is called addiction. So, what I wrote in here is the majority of addicts I've worked with over the past 30 years recognize the shame and acknowledge that their self esteem is low overall. Because when you are involved in an addictive behavior or with an addictive substance, most people know it's a problem and they want to quit, but they can't. They've tried to quit, they know it's affecting their health, they know it's going to affect their health in the future, and they want to quit and they try to quit, but they always go back, right? So that's an overall self esteem thing because they start to feel like, what is wrong with me? I can't do this. Now, it doesn't mean they have no self esteem. So don't hear what I'm not saying, but it does take a hit on your self esteem. There's a lot of research that says body image affects to a third of our self esteem, up to a third of our self esteem. That's a lot, right? So if we're struggling in an area where we really feel low self esteem, it can affect our whole overall picture, our view of ourselves. So I wrote, I agree with Bert's friend that people who truly value themselves, if we value our health, especially if we value our body, if we say we want longevity, we say we want to be around for our kids and grandkids, but we're putting in toxic substances to our body. So, those who truly value themselves, their health especially, will not, on a consistent basis, poison their bodies with toxic substances. I'm not talking about an occasional drink. I'm not talking about an occasional junk food fest. However, regularly poisoning your body with nicotine, highly processed food, an abundance of sugar, alcohol, the harmful substances in other ingested or inhaled substances, while knowing the damage that excessive consumption of these substances has on your body, is highly suggestive of low self esteem or low self worth. Basically, your behavior reflects your identity, and we'll get to that more in just a minute. But how I treat myself in some way, to some degree, does say how I feel about myself. Again, I'm not talking about an occasional drunk. I'm not talking about, eating at fast food twice a week. I'm not talking about, excessive sugar consumption once in a while. But if people do these on an excessive basis and they know this is going to lead to health problems, or it already has, which is the case for many of the people who are having bariatric surgery. It's already caused health problems, right? It's already caused issues in relationships. Cigarette smoking is going to cause problems for your health if you live long enough. There's no question about that. Excessive amounts of alcohol will eventually cause problems to your body if you live long enough. We know this. There is science that tells us this. It's not a question, it's not a hypothesis, it's a reality. So if you do these things and there are already problems and you continue to do them, we're talking about addiction. And addiction, it is a disease and people need to get help to overcome the addiction, right? I am all about that. I'm a recovering addict. I know that. So it's not a judgment. I understand that it's an addiction. And anybody with a disease, which addiction is one of those, needs help to overcome it. But anybody with the disease of addiction is struggling with their self esteem. So, what happens and why don't people get the help they need? Well, part of the problem is their self esteem is in the way. Part of the problem is denial is in the way. Part of the problem is fear is in the way. We've talked a lot about that and we will talk a lot more about that. But let's go on with what I wrote here. All right. If I could read it, if I could see it, would be so much more helpful. Um, all right. All right. What it basically says is I don't feel good about myself. And so I eat to the point that my body is negatively affected. I drink or smoke to the point that my health and my family are affected. I spend so much money to the point that my budget is blown. I gamble to the point it interferes with my family responsibilities because it makes me feel better in the short run. That's what addiction is. And it involves shame. And addiction does involve low self esteem. Because think about it, people with an overall high sense of self esteem, which is their identity, treat themselves in ways that reflect their sense of self worth. I value my health over this cigarette. I value my health over this food. I value my family and my health and my life and my stability over this gambling thing. Yes, it's a disease, but because I value these things so much, I'm going to get help for the disease that I have. And hopefully, people who are struggling with addictions have people in their lives who are saying, I'm worried about you. I see this happening in your life. I see you saying you want to lose weight, and yet I find wrappers in a car, or I find, wrappers in your pockets. I hear you saying that you want to quit drinking, and yet I'm finding alcohol and liquor bottles hidden around the house or in your car. I hear you saying that you want to quit cigarettes, but I smell it on your breath. So I'm concerned that you're unable to do this on your own. Please let me help you find some help for yourself. That's what love does. We help the people who we see struggling, that we love so much, to get help. We can't make them. And eventually it has to come down to their own decision. However, I believe it's very true that addictions, for all kinds of reasons, there's shame that lead to addictions, and shame is often correlated with low self-esteem. And as a person tries and fails to succeed at quitting smoking or getting healthier or quitting drinking or whatever it might be, they feel worse and worse and worse about themselves. So I agree with the guy said, and so does James Clear, who is the author of Atomic Habits, a really amazing book. So I just said in my email, people with low or high self-esteem, which is my identity. My identity is that I have high self-esteem. Treat themselves in ways that reflect that. I feel too good about myself to do something that's going to lead to my poor health. I feel too good about my life and myself and the people in my life to continue to engage in this behavior that is negatively going to affect them. And listen, as I said, I'm a recovering addict. Prior to going to treatment 34 years ago, I had very low self-esteem. And I was acting it out in all kinds of ways, one addiction after another. And I feel so grateful that I was only 29 years old when I found myself in treatment. And after treatment, I needed much, much, much therapy because I had to work on the issues underneath the addiction, the shame, the low self esteem, the fear, the lack of healthy communication skills, all of those things. I had to work in for years of therapy before I went back to school to do the work that I do now. So it's not a judgment, it's just a reality. And so helping people to improve their self esteem, their identity, requires that they look at what that is. And here's what James Clear, again, author of Atomic Habits, has to say. Because a lot of times people struggle to change their habits because of the low self esteem, because of how they identify themselves through their self talk and that shame that says, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. So let's hear what James Clear has to say. In my email, I say, so Bert's friend made a good point. And as you all said, you may need to know more about a person's entire story before making a judgment of that sort. But there is likely some validity to what he said about the smoker. So here's what James Clear has to say. Most people don't even consider identity change when they set out to improve. He's talking about diets. He's talking about developing healthy habits, whether you want to run, whether you want to quit smoking, whether you want to lose weight. He says most people don't even consider identity change. They just think, I want to be skinny. Outcome, they want to be skinny, which is the outcome. And if I stick to this diet, then I'll be skinny. So the diet is the process to get there. They set goals and determine the actions they should take to achieve those goals without considering the beliefs that drive their actions. They never shift the way they look at themselves, and they don't realize that their old identity can sabotage their new plans for change. What that means is if I see myself as a failure in diets and trying to stop drinking and trying to stop smoking because I've tried and I've not been able to do it, and I feel really badly about myself. So my identity is in this area of my life, I'm a failure. So if we don't change the identity, what he's saying is it's going to be real darn hard to change that behavior. So he says they never shift the way they look at themselves, and they don't realize that this old identity can sabotage their new plans for change. Behavior that is incongruent with the self will not last. It's hard to change your habits if you never change the underlying beliefs that led to your past behavior. You have a new goal and a new plan, but you haven't changed who you are. You haven't changed how you feel about yourself. You haven't changed the low self esteem. You haven't changed the negative self talk. It's hard to change your habits if you never change the underlying beliefs that led to your past behavior. You have a new goal and a new plan, but you haven't changed who you are again. So I think he makes a good point there. And I think Bert's friend made a good point when he said that this cigarette smoker has low self esteem. I think that anybody who continually, especially knowing that there are health consequences or early death associated with their behavior, or ostracizing family members or friends, pushing people away from us when we want to do in this world is connect with other people. That's what we really want to do. We want to connect with other people. But when we're engaged in addictions and our self esteem gets battered, and we continue to batter our self esteem by the way we talk about ourselves and don't believe that we can change, we're not going to be able to follow through with that behavior because our behavior reflects how we feel about ourselves. Our behavior reflects our identity. Our behavior does reflect our self worth. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's not a judgment. It's saying that if you're struggling to stick with the lifestyle changes that follow weight loss surgery or that follow any kind of treatment for any kind of addiction, or if you're trying to cut down on your drinking, or if you're trying to quit smoking, yes, there's an addictive behavior that's biological, and you need to get help for that from a physician or a treatment program. But beyond that, trust me, there is a whole well of psychological and emotional issues to work through. So it's really hard for people to stay sober, to stay on a diet, to stay off drugs, to stay off any addictive behavior or substance if they don't do the work in the long haul. And that, my friends, is the truth. And that is why I encourage you to immerse yourself in podcasts, in reading, in support groups, in 12-step groups, in smart recovery, in whatever program you get the kind of support you need. If you have an addiction and you're also trying to keep a healthy weight and you don't even think you have let's just say, if you have a food addiction and you have weight loss surgery and you go into that operating room, you are taking two different diseases with you. You are taking the disease of obesity and you are taking the disease of addiction. The surgeon is only treating your physiology for obesity. Your brain is not being touched. Your addiction comes out of surgery still seeking its fix. And so a lot of people switch addictions after weight loss surgery because they need something to make them feel better. All right, maybe this will be a good time to steer into another couple videos about food addiction. So I might. And interestingly, my friend Susan Mitchell, Dr. Susan Mitchell, who's a dietitian who works specifically with bariatric surgery patients with the bariatric population, has a wonderful podcast called Bariatric Surgery Success. And this week she posted an episode in which I was a guest, and it's all about transfer addiction. So these things all just lined up the way they were supposed to. But that's all I have for today. I will be back later in the week or early next week. Actually, it's Thursday, so it'll be next week. And we'll talk about food addiction some more. I look forward to seeing with you. Please share this podcast with people you know who might benefit from the information. If you'd like more information on the BariAftercare program in full, please go to www.BariAftercare.com. My website is www.conniestapletonphd.com. And I will meet with you next week. And remember, it's your health. It's your life, your health this day and every day. It's your responsibility. Do your best, my friends, and we will meet again next week. Have a good weekend and recovery from any disease, and obesity is a disease. Recovery is required on weekends also. Make it a good one.